Good morning, everyone. Or for some people, it may be good afternoon, or even in Israel, it's probably close to evening. So, welcome you all for the second day of the conference on Judaism, science, and human flourishing. In the first day, that is yesterday, we were fortunate to listen to 4 excellent lectures and had terrific discussions after each one of them. So in the first lecture, Professor Dan Haybron from St. Louis University clarified the complex concept of human flourishing as it relates to the notions or the concepts of happiness, or welfare, of human flourishing by highlighting the importance of beauty and the aesthetic experience and emphasizing the joy that we derive from doing things well as good craftsmen do. In the second lecture, Professor Corey Keyes of Emory University, who is a psychologist specializing in the opposite of flourishing, he specializes in languishing. He explored how we can enhance psychological well-being by focusing on self-acceptance, positive relations, personal growth, sense of purpose, environmental mastery, and autonomy, so that people can feel good about their life. In the third lecture, Professor Frank Inferna of ASU focused on the challenges that people today, when they reach midlife, the years are roughly between 40 to 60 or 65. And during that time, which presumably is a time to flourish, they actually experience a lot of stresses and a lot of pressures related to family issues, aging, career challenges, and financial or material kind of stresses. And based on a comparative analysis from other countries, he offered suggestions for social policies that could alleviate, or at least in principle, could alleviate some of these stresses, allowing people to flourish when they are presumably at the prime of their life. Finally, our keynote address by Professor Robert Eisen for George Washington University offered the historical perspective from which to ponder the prosperity and prominence of Jews in economic, intellectual, and artistic domains of modern life. And he argued, or he shared his findings from his latest book, arguing that Judaism, with its emphasis on autonomy, on this worldliness, on intellectual freedom, and on appreciation of education, all those 4 factors enable Jews to cope with the challenges of modernity better than any other ethnic group. However, he cautioned us that assimilation and acculturation are forces that may distance Jews from their own traditions and social values, and therefore there's no guarantee that Jews will continue to thrive and prosper in the future. So our sessions today, the second day of the conference, continue to focus on Jews, Judaism, and flourishing. The current session will be chaired by Professor Jeff Levin from Baylor University, and he will moderate the session and introduce our presenters. So, Professor Levin, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Hava. Appreciate it. So what I'd like to do, we're going to have 2 talks. I'll introduce the panelists before their talk, and we'll hold the Q&A till both talks are done. The first talk, the 2 presenters are Dr. Adam Cohen of Arizona State. Dr. Cohen's a psychology professor. His main research interests views cultural, social, and personality psych. He's interested in how religious differences function as cultural differences, affecting domains including religious identity and motivation, well-being, moral judgment, forgiveness, and so on. Dr. Cohen is also interested in applying evolutionary theory to religion. He's the associate editor of JPSP, and he's had grant funding from Notre Dame, from the Templeton Foundation, National Science Foundation, DARPA, Air Force Office of Scientific Research, and the Army Research Institute. And also part of the talk will be Catherine Johnson, who I know from a research project that is joint between our group and a group at Harvard. Dr. Johnson is research professor of psychology at ASU. His background's in religious studies and social psych, and her research focuses on the social perception of non-human agents such as God, nature, and robots, on how these perceptions are associated with moral decision-making, values, social attitudes, and pro-social behavior. She's been funded by Templeton, DARPA, NSF. She received the journal Religions Young Investigator Award in 2021 and the Margaret Gorman Early Career Award last year. And she has over 70 pubs appearing in places like JPSP, Journal of Experimental Social Psych, and Perspectives on Psychological Science. And she currently also is associate editor for Psychology of Religion and Spirituality, which is a great APA journal. So I will now turn it over to Drs. Cohn and Dr. Johnson. Take it away.
So, Kathy and I are going to be talking this morning about some work we've been doing, funded mainly by the Templeton Foundation for about the last 4 years, looking at the ways that fasting might promote flourishing, and looking at fasting in a religious context as well as a non-religious context. So, in launching this project some years ago, I learned that it's not just Jews that fast on Yom Kippur, but that a variety of people fast for a variety of reasons. So, very famously, Muslims also fast at times throughout the year, like in their holy month of Ramadan. I also learned that a lot of Mormon Christians fast once a month on a Sunday, and they do this, I think, explicitly for pro-social reasons. So it's very much expected that the money that they save from spending, money on food that Sunday they give to charity. And so when you're in synagogue on Yom Kippur and they ask you for pledges, there's a little bit of a connection there between the holiday and a pledge, but this connection between looking out for other people and being charitable and pro-social is really pretty explicitly articulated in Mormonism, and people fast for secular reasons as well. And so I haven't really kept up with this. This is not something that I do, but maybe 5 years ago, I became aware of this trend that people would intermittently fast for health reasons. They would wake up in the morning and they wouldn't eat for several hours because they're trying to leave a certain number of hours between their meals. And the idea is that this helps promote their health, that it promotes weight loss and blood sugar regulation, and I don't know what else. And I don't know how many physicians and nurses and nutritionists we have today. Maybe someone can weigh in on this. I think that there are demonstrated health benefits of this intermittent fasting. I think I did also see some concerns that, yeah, your blood sugar might be better, your blood pressure might be better, but the all-cause mortality is higher among people that engage in intermittent fasting. So I think there are some real open questions here about physical health and other forms of flourishing as well, like prosociality, that fasting might relate to. And so we've been focusing for quite a few years on Yom Kippur and the fasting that accompanies Yom Kippur. As a lot of us know, um, traditionally religious Jews will fast for somewhat more than 24 hours, from before the start of Kol Nidre until the end of Ne'ilah, on Yom Kippur. And we've been asking whether or not we can find any scientific evidence that this is good for people in a variety of ways. And we've also been comparing this to people who fast for more secular reasons. And so we'll tell you a little bit about this work over the next 20 minutes or so. I remember from my close colleague and friend, Professor Frankenfurna, yesterday that he showed a model. His was even more complicated like this, and he said, "Don't worry about this. We're not really trying to get the whole model across, but this is a conceptual um, schematic, a conceptual representation of a statistical model. And just to give you a broad overview, what we're proposing is that when you fast for religious reasons, this could be for Yom Kippur, which is mostly where we've been studying it. Maybe it's for Ramadan as well. Maybe this is for Fast Sunday among Mormon Christians as well. There's an arrow there to depict the idea that this is going to influence spiritual transformation, that people are going to feel a sense of repentance, recommitment to religion, recommitment to being a good person, and that that spiritual transformation in turn is going to exert an effect on flourishing. Flourishing in our conception involves certain virtues like self-control, humility, prosociality, which I alluded to a few minutes ago. There could be social aspects of flourishing, like closeness to God, closeness to your religious group, and physical outcomes as well, like health and emotions. And if you go back to the beginning where we have self-reflection, I'm not sure whether you can see my arrow moving around a lot or not, but I think you can. That's pointing to this arrow. And what we mean by that is that the more you engage in self-reflection as part of this process, these benefits are going to multiply. That the relationship between fasting and spiritual transformation will be all the stronger the more you take the fasting, but also other aspects of the Yom Kippur observance, whether you really take that as an opportunity to self-reflect. Okay. We think that secular fasting, if you look at the bottom, secular fasting could have some benefits as well. It might result in some or all of these same outcomes on the right here, but we don't think that spiritual transformation and self-reflection are as much a part of secular or health-oriented fasting. And so we think that maybe we'll get some of the same outcomes, but perhaps not as much, or perhaps not via the same process, via things like self-reflection and spiritual transformation. Kathy, good so far? Because I can't see anybody. I can only see the slides.
Very good.
Okay, keep going.
Proceed.
Proceed. Okay, great. So we want to tell you about some studies that we did starting in 2023 and bringing us up to the current time. Um, Over the course of several years, we recruited some samples of Jewish participants. We've actually followed them over a number of years, 2023, 2024, 2025, and we asked them questions about their Yom Kippur experiences. Did you fast? Did you attend services? How did you feel after the holiday? Did you feel that you had spiritually changed at all? Did you feel more pro-social? Did you feel that you had better self-control? And so this first sample is 351 people, females and males, some adhering to somewhat more traditional, we can call them traditional denominations of Judaism, some of them more reform, some of them more secular or cultural. And we sent them a survey both before and after Yom Kippur to ask them about their experiences. We'll note that this was just before October 7th, this particular data collection, which is that's obviously very important to take into context. And we find that not everybody fasts on Yom Kippur. 55% of our sample reported doing a full or a partial fast. 31% of people did not fast. And among these, sorry, not among these, separate from these, we find that 24% said they could not fast. And the average duration of the fast was about 19 hours. So some people go the whole whatever it is, 24, 25, 26 hours. Other people do a bit less, and perhaps not surprisingly, Orthodox and conservative Jews were more likely to fast than some of these other groupings of Jews. But the ones that didn't fast, it's not like they were not adhering. Many of them appealed to health reasons, which, as a lot of us know, are very halachically acceptable reasons. Either not to fast or even halachically demanded reasons not to fast. I don't know how many of you have seen this show on Netflix, Long Story Short. It's this animated show about this Jewish family. I'm never so good at linking actors to their roles, and particularly when it's voices and not the faces. But the Paul Reiser is the dad, and there are these children and grandchildren. And there was an episode in this show where we learned that so there's a daughter-in-law, Kendra, and she's married to Shira, the daughter of the family. Um, and I remember when we first met Kendra early on, there's a lot of flashbacks and flash forwards in the show. Um, but there was a flashback to when they met, and I remember they met in this grocery store. It was near Yontif, And Shira, the daughter of the family, had honey in her cart, and Kendra, the wife, this daughter-in-law, said, you better watch out. There's actually not a hechsher on this honey. And I had no inkling that Kendra was a convert. But later in the show, you find out the backstory of how she did end up converting to Judaism. And there's this scene where you learn about how she's sort of on a path, not for great reasons, if you've seen the show. Can you see the video coming up? Kathy, can people
Yes,
see the
yes, you
video?
can.
Okay,
Yes.
so you learn how she came to discover Judaism and it wasn't for a great reason actually. But she goes to synagogue on Yom Kippur, and she has this experience that drove home so beautifully. It was a very emotional scene where you learn that Yom Kippur is not about you. We're all in this together. And I want to see if I can play this so that you can see it if you haven't seen this little, it's just a 30-second clip, but it really beautifully shows how much the whole experience of Yom Kippur, including fasting, but including the repentance process in general, is a collective process. She goes to shul. She doesn't know what's going on.
We can't hear the sound.
These are the prayers of confession. We're saying how we've sinned, we have trespassed, we have betrayed.
I have trespassed. I have betrayed.
We have deceived, we have mocked.
I have deceived. I have mocked.
No, sweetie, we have.
We.
So this explains how she ends up converting, and this is the most beautiful demonstration of how she was truly repentant and came to feel that, we were all in this all together, that it wasn't just her that had done these sins that she felt genuinely remorseful for. And so our theoretical model um, tries to put the Yom Kippur experience, including fasting, in this social context, the idea that we're all in this together. And we think that could be part of this repentance process and part of this transformative process. And so we're measuring three aspects of spiritual transformation: the idea that you might self-reflect, the idea that you might repent, and the idea that you might recommit. And then we try to link that to flourishing outcomes. So Tyler Vanderweel, the Harvard epidemiologist who's done a lot of work on flourishing, this is how he measures flourishing. And these are aspects of flourishing that we measure in various of our studies. And it encompasses various aspects of life. Am I worried about safety? Do I feel happy? Do I feel healthy? Do I feel content with my relationships? And so on. And so we find again, echoing Frank yesterday, don't pay too much attention to the numbers, but we find that fasting and self-reflection are associated with spiritual transformation here and here. And we find that spiritual transformation is associated with a lot of flourishing outcomes. Maybe not self-control in this study, but humility, prosociality, closeness to the Jewish people, and both positive and negative emotions, which I think is very interesting. You could say, we heard something about this yesterday, maybe from Corey Keyes and others, that you have to embrace all sorts of emotional experiences if you want to live a full life. And so we have a second study where we go online and we try to solicit people that fast for religious reasons. These are our Jewish subjects from study one with some other online participants, but also people who fast for secular or health reasons, people who engage maybe in intermittent fasting. We have 603 fasters. We're 10 shy of 613. And these are people who are fasting for things like discipline, weight loss, sports reasons, health, and maybe just out of curiosity, compared to a sample of Jews that fast for more traditionally more traditionally religious related reasons. And when we compare them, we find that those people who fast for more religious reasons are higher in a lot of aspects of what we could call flourishing, self-reflection, spiritual transformation, but also prosociality, closeness to the religious group. That makes sense. The secular people don't have a religious group that's salient in this study. Closeness to God. They're both high in positive emotions, but the religious fasters are also higher in negative emotions as well. Professor Johnson, keep going. Nothing to add so far?
Doing great.
Okay. And then we have an experiment, which I told Kathy we should try to do this. It's never going to work, but Kathy, I think, is a genius in our field, as Professor Levin went on about for two reasons. One of them is that she is the world's expert, not just in people's beliefs in God, but people's nuanced beliefs in God. A lot of Jewish people, for example, don't believe in a highly personal God, but they believe in a God that is beyond human understanding. Um, and the second reason why Kathy is such a valuable collaborator is I said to her, we wanted to do this experiment where we wanted to tell undergraduates, you have to come into the lab and you have to have fasted for 18 hours before you come into the lab. And while you're fasting, we want you to be thinking about the spiritual benefits or we want you to be thinking about physical benefits. And I said, we could try this. It's never going to work. But she got it to work. She got 167 people to fast for almost a whole day thinking about spiritual benefits, and 127 people to come in having fasted for 18 hours, thinking about why this might have physical benefits. And she pulled this off. And so again, we have this model that we've alluded to before. We think that people thinking about religious benefits might be more likely to have these spiritual experiences that result in things like prosociality and volunteering and negative emotions. We showed you just a slide ago that religious fasting brings up both negative and positive emotions, and that secular fasting might have some of these benefits, maybe not all of them, maybe principally feeling good about yourself. And to measure prosociality, we give people volunteer opportunities in these experiments where we say, do you want to come back and volunteer? And we wanted to see if fasting could promote this volunteerism in a way that maybe Jews are pretty good at talking about on Yom Kippur, but in a way to me that also evokes the fact that other religious groups, like Mormons, for example, really focus on the prosociality that you can get out of fasting, which is a little bit counterintuitive. You feel lousy, you feel terrible. Now you want to help other people. And what do we find? We find that the groups fasted for 18 hours, like we asked them to. They found it meaningful. They found it difficult. These are all non-significant differences between the groups. Um, the people that fasted for spiritual reasons really did think about spiritual things more, and the people that fasted for health reasons really did think about the health stuff more. We just call that a manipulation check. And then in terms of outcomes, the one area where we found the groups being different is that the religious fasters, the spiritual fasters, had higher scores when it came to a recommitment to help other people. So fasting for religious reasons seems to really accentuate this idea that I need to be helping others, maybe people that are less fortunate than I am. Now, maybe I understand a bit more what it means to be hungry and to feel lousy and wretched and humble. And I need to turn that into helping other people. So these were questions like pledging to make a monetary donation, planning to be more charitable, planning to spend more time on interpersonal relationships, trying to be more moral, and so on. And one last piece that we wanted to mention, because this is very much the theme of this particular session within this wonderful conference, is comparing the US and Israel. We had the opportunity to collect data not just in the US, but also with the help of Ariel Levitas, who's a professor at GW in George Washington University in Jewish education. We had the opportunity to compare the effects of fasting in the US versus Israel. Again, there's a historical context here. When we collected these data, the Israel-Hamas war is still going on. But we found some interesting similarities and some interesting differences. Israeli Jews are a little bit more likely than American Jews to fast, and they fast longer. They're more likely to fast for what you would traditionally consider to be the full duration of the observance. U.S. Jews, on the other hand, reported higher rates of repentance and spiritual transformation. The U.S. Jews reported a stronger Jewish identity in the context of this holiday and closeness to the Jewish people, while the Israeli Jews scored higher not just on positive but also negative emotions. And then flourishing was highest for Jews who felt close to the Jewish people, Jews who fasted. This is an important conclusion. It didn't matter whether you fasted fully or partially. That would increase flourishing or was associated with higher flourishing, even if you did as much as you could, but then you broke the fast a bit earlier. And flourishing was higher for the Israeli Jews. And then Jews who broke the fast in a social context, like a group, like you go over someone's house or you host people at your house, like my parents always did when I was growing up. We would have the whole neighborhood over to break the fast. They had higher scores for flourishing compared with people who broke the fast privately. So we have a couple of graphs. These data are really very recent, very recently collected, so that some of the graphs are a little fancier than others. This is a nice graph that Kathy made. You can see that in 2023, American and Israeli Jews were pretty similar in flourishing. These are data from the Global Flourishing Study, a separate data collection, which Professor Levin, I know you know a lot about. The Israeli Jews are just a touch higher, but then this gap widens in 2024 with the American Jewish flourishing going down and the Israeli flourishing going up a bit. I think that's interesting context. But then here are some of the not very pretty graphs because these are very hot off the presses. Israelis fast longer. Uh, the only non-difference is if you're Orthodox. If you're Orthodox, you fast for the whole time, pretty much no matter what. And I know denominations are a little bit different in Israel. This is a little bit complex, but the other groups of Jews, the Israelis are fasting a bit longer than the American Jews. The Israelis, again, not if you're Orthodox, but if you're any other denomination, the Israelis are reporting a bit more positive emotion compared to the American Jews, but also negative emotions. Same thing, not if you're Orthodox. The Orthodox experience seems to be a bit similar across the two countries, but all the other groups, you get not only positive emotions, but more negative emotions among the Israeli Jews. We're not quite sure why these are. And critically, a partial fast has the same flourishing benefits as what would traditionally be considered a full fast. And we think that's a really important takeaway. Maybe some rabbis and maybe health practitioners, I don't know, want to know about this. You don't have to fast for the whole time. You fast as much as you can, it will have the same benefits. I think that's a really nice, interesting conclusion from this. So, key takeaways. Religious fasting is a predictor of recommitment to live a better life. That's a nice conclusion. It can lead to prosociality, charitability, helping other people. It's associated with closeness to your religious group. We did not find that fasting on Yom Kippur increased or was associated with more feelings of closeness to God. We thought we would, but we didn't find that in this study. I'm not entirely sure why. Fasting elicits negative but also positive emotions. And the thinking, how you think about the fast matters. The benefits are enhanced by thinking about your spiritual well-being rather than focusing on the purely physical aspects of fasting. So I'm going to end there, and I think we're going to leave time for questions after both of the talks, rather than after this one, but make them fast if we're running short on time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was terrific. And again, we'll hear the next talk, and then at the end we'll just open it up for questions from anybody to anybody. The next talk is by Dr. Panita Russo-Netzer. Dr. Russo-Netzer is Associate Professor, Senior Lecturer, Author, and Researcher, and she heads the Community Meaning and Healing Research and Development Institute and the Resilience and Optimal Development Lab at Akva Academic College. She's founder and director of the Compass Institute for the Study and Application of Meaning in Life, and heads the academic training program in logotherapy at Tel Aviv University. Professor Russo-Netzer serves as associate editor at Current Psychology. Everybody's editor of a journal on this panel. This is great. She's associate editor of Current Psychology and has published numerous academic articles and book chapters. She's co-author and co-editor of several books on meaning in life, resilience, and existential psychology. So Dr. Russo-Netzer, take it away.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone, and good evening to me. I just want to thank the organizers for this important event and for inviting me to talk about a fascinating topic, which I hope that I'll be able to explore with you at the brief time I have. And in this brief talk, I would like to share a bit about the psychological, relational, and cultural mechanisms that may help explain how profound collective threat, trauma, and instability can coexist with surprisingly high report of life satisfaction and flourishing, and what this paradox may teach us. So here's the paradox in one glance. We see across global well-being rankings, especially the World Happiness Report, that Israel remains near the top. We see in 2024, fifth in global ranking, 2025, still in the top 10, and number one in global ranking, happiness among youth aged 15 to 24. And we see that in many people, the immediate reaction is, how can that be true in a society living with ongoing tension, loss, and threat? And one of the leaders, actually, of the survey, of the World Survey, referred to this puzzling question as, to the casual observer, this looks like a statistical error. How does a high conflict zone sit comfortably among peaceful Scandinavian welfare states? So the question that arises is, what exactly is being measured, and what forces help stabilize life evaluation even under prolonged threat? So I'll try a bit to make sense of Israel's high position in global happiness ranking. And to do that, we need to clarify what this ranking actually captures. So first of all, methodologically, the World Happiness Report relies on a 3-year rolling average designed to reduce short-term volatility. And so as a result, we see that the 2024 and 2025 rankings are actually influenced substantially by data from 2021 to 2023, years that included rather periods of relative stability. This means that ranking is to some extent buffered and doesn't fully absorb the immediate shock of October 7th within a single year. But second, and more important to this conference, is the definition of happiness being used. So the report does not primarily measure a day-to-day emotional joy. Instead, it focuses on life evaluation based on the Cantril leather question, where people need to rate their life from 0 to 10. In other words, it captures how people evaluate their life as a whole, including its direction, identity, and values, rather than how they feel in the specific moment. So a useful way to think about this is the iceberg metaphor, maybe. So what sits above the waterline is a cognitive life evaluation, asking, how is my life going overall? But below the waterline is what many people are living through daily. The emotional load, worry, stress that we see it spiking, sadness, fear, anger. Those emotional indicators can spike sharply even when overall life evaluation remains relatively stable. So maybe the key question or the key point is that Israelis are not necessarily happy in the sense of feeling joyful in the moment, but they can still report relatively high life satisfaction while simultaneously carrying profound emotional pain. As Adam before mentioned, and I think Corey Keys mentioned yesterday, we can hold both painful and negative emotions as well as positive emotions. And this distinction helps us hold the paradox that we can still score highly on life evaluation and yet be experiencing intense distress in everyday life. So going a bit deeper, we see here a sharp drop around October 7th from 7.5 to 6.8, a clear shock point in overall life evaluation. But what happens next is important. We see the curve doesn't bounce back overnight. We see it climbs gradually through early 2024 and into late 2024 until it reaches a recovery point of about 7.5 by July, August 2025. And the key point here is that the rebound doesn't necessarily mean recovery is complete. It often reflects adaptation and coping capacity, but also we can also see, as we later will see more deeply, the distress can still remain high underneath. And this suggests, I think, an important point, that resilience is not a straight line. It's a capacity to absorb a shock and over time to return toward baseline or even stabilize in a new equilibrium. And I think also this rebound means that the broader life evaluation system, how people assess their lives as a whole, can regain stability over time, even while daily distress may continue. And it's also interesting, I'm working with the 9/11 survivors, working with the WTCH, and what we see in previous study, comparing the reactions of New Yorkers to the 9/11 terror attack with the reactions of Israelis to the second Intifada, we see that they both had high levels of PTSD, post-traumatic syndrome, in both cases. But in Israel, after a few months, there was a recovery thanks to the support, resilience, and social cohesion. So this is a very similar picture. At the same time, it's important to hold both realities. So there is a heavy underlayer underneath this picture of resilience. We see a widening burden of distress, burnout, and trauma exposure. We see that although the society overall can look resilient, but still carrying a massive psychological load, especially when stress becomes chronic. And we also see the toll of suicide ideation rising. We see youth risk, and we see more people asking for help and reaching out for help. We know that from many studies about collective trauma that can be seen as existential disruption, shattering our worldviews, assumptions, narratives, and pushes us to confront with uncertainty, vulnerability, chaos, collapse of collective taken for grantedness. We also see a crisis of moral injury among the general public. Unlike classical PTSD symptoms that center around fear, moral injury often centers around guilt, shame, a sense of fractured sense of self, and it's not always well addressed by standard treatment models. Another key gap worth mentioning is the cohesion. Although the cohesion is real, it's also very fragile and unevenly distributed across institutions. Here we see a split picture of trust in some domains, especially those tied to safety and collective protection. Trust can remain relatively high. For example, in terms of the IDF, the trust in soldiers from the people, but institutional and political trust eroded sharply. We see it's creating an internal fracture that does not always show up in national well-being averages. And we also see overall declining trust. The 2025 report also showed a significant drop in public trust in government institutions and a decline in the perception of freedom to make life choices. So again, in collective trauma, there is often a second wound, not only what happened, the trauma that happened, but also the sense that the systems meant to protect people did not function. So this also magnifies fear and a sense of helplessness, but it also accelerates a shift that we soon see. People begin relying less on top-down structures and more bottom-up networks, such as family, neighbors, local initiatives, mutual aid. So when we see that when formal systems feel unreliable, people often shift toward horizontal support. And in other words, we see that when top-down confidence weakens, bottom-up community becomes the psychological infrastructure. So at this point, I really want to dive in a bit deeper, and this is a very emotional picture for me. This is a home of one of my dear friends who was burned completely during the October 7th event and massacre in one of the kibbutzes. And I was asking myself, as a researcher, as a humanist, as a person, how can we sustain hope in the face of despair? And so I'd like to dive a bit deeper from the paradox in the data to the human reality beneath it. And the question is not whether despair exists. It does, of course. The question is how individuals and societies maintain or sustain psychological life, even well-being, as we've seen, when reality feels shattered, when safety is unstable, when trust is shaken, and when grief becomes continuous rather than episodic. So I will present a few studies very briefly. So again, I'm open to questions you may have. The first one is about the intrapsychic reality. What we did is to understand that many people couldn't find words in face of the trauma. And we asked ourselves, how can we better understand what people are going through? So this study is called When Language Falters, Dream Speak. So when ordinary language cannot contain what happened, what does the psyche go to process the psyche go to process the unprocessable? So we see dreams functioning as a symbolic spaces through which individuals can engage with core existential concerns that were heightened by collective trauma. And what we found from analysis of more than 200 dream narratives collected from the general public, non-clinical people, trying to understand the state of mind of people few months after the events. And what we saw very briefly, it's 4 central themes that are emerging from the data analysis. Each theme is conceptualized as a kind of a movement along a continuum between existential polarities or tensions that shape the participants' inner worlds as they attempt to process a fractured reality. And in a sense, I would say that dreams can carry the fragments of suffering into a symbolic space where meaning can begin to be reclaimed. So what we found very briefly, the second theme of the analysis is the confrontation with finitude, with the concreteness of death, of an unmediated encounter with mortality that is felt very vividly. Many people spoke about in the body, not just in the mind. And we know that under a collective threat, dreams do not merely depict death. They often stage the lived texture of vulnerability. But yet, this is where the existential paradox emerges, because the acute awareness of mortality can also awaken a heightened sense of presence. What really matters in life become vivid, the sense of living more urgently, more real. I would say that in existential terms, the awareness of death intensifies aliveness. And we also see people moving between questions of how should I live? What can I do now? We also saw that in previous studies during COVID, by the way. The second theme was about the moral struggle. I mentioned moral injury earlier. So the second theme centers on moral pain. Many people described in their dreams a sense of guilt, helplessness, the fear of having failed as protectors, taking responsibility. We saw a lot of narratives of existential moral injury. Many said, if only I could, I felt like leaving people behind. I couldn't save them, freezing in the wrong moment. But also at the same time, we saw many narratives shifting towards action, taking up tools, making split-second decisions, taking care of the helpless, like animals or babies, and symbolic efforts of reclaiming agency and responsibility. So we see this tendency between a paralysis and action, agency and responsibility very sharply. The third theme captures the relational wound. Many people spoke in their dreams about existential isolation, the anxiety of meaninglessness that grows when connection collapses, feeling neglected, alone, left outside. We know that in trauma, one of the most painful experiences is not only what happened, but the sense of that no one can truly reach you. But at the same time, we also saw the repair, wanting to repair, being sense of movement toward introsubjective sense of looking out for people, trying to save people, trying to the sense of not being alone. And I will move to the fourth one. The last one is about the symbolic reconstruction. And here we see the active striving of the psyche to transform a sense of chaos into some kind of symbolic meaning making. So we see here the dreams often may function as a kind of symbolic metabolism, taking raw chaos and very very separate parts of the reality and trying to shape them into a structure and storyline, moving from confusion and chaos into some kind of resolution and integration. So very briefly, just to conclude this part of the state of mind of how people can move between paradoxes and holding both ends. I think that clinically and emotionally and humanly, this invites a shift in stance. Dreams should not be viewed as pathology or symptoms. They can also be understood as attempts at narrative recovery and a sense of how we can help people process and try to make sense of what's going on, and even to create some kind of courage to speak up, and to create a collective repair. So this is where I want to say that we see that of course dreams can carry fragments of suffering into symbolic space where coherence can begin to return. They do not erase loss, but they may open an inner pathway from rapture toward restoration, from speechlessness to expression, from fragmentation to some form of integration. And this becomes an important part of moving from the inner world of symbolic processing, which is critical to gain a sense of resilience and even what I would say, call it later, a post-traumatic growth to a broader sense of the community. So zooming out of the intrapsych, I want to present another very briefly two studies, one a mixed method project. One of them was a qualitative one, interviews with displaced community members, and the second one was from the general society. And these studies were launched just a few days after October 7th events, allowing us to capture resilience not as a retrospective story people tell later, but as a lived experience, a live, I would say, psychological process, messy, fluctuating, deeply embedded in daily life. So I would like to very briefly present each of them. And what we learned from the quantitative one is that the engine of coping is prioritizing meaning, which activating optimism and then taking action. And this picture, which I found very moving, is a picture of Tamir, who lost his parents very brutally murdered in their home, and their home was completely burned. And Tamir chooses to return to his burned down house where he lost everything. And in a very miraculously way, the only thing that survived from the fire was a menorah. And 1.5 months after the events on October, on Hanukkah, he decides what I would call the triumph of the human spirit to light up the first candle of Hanukkah in his burned down house where he lost everything. And this is very connected to what we found. What we found is that prioritizing meaning Prioritizing meaning means how we allocate our time to activities and whatever we choose to do based on our values. Prioritizing meaning, seeking social support, and maintaining optimism predicted resilience. We also found that it also protected against a sense of internal chaos and against depression, anxiety, and stress. So what we saw that once people prioritized meaning, they did something actively to which aligns with their values. This contributed to their sense of optimism, which later contributed to their sense of resilience. So optimism and meaning in life act as mediators in a way. People who actively prioritize meaning and seek support are better able to sustain hope and manage symptoms of distress. And it's very important to say that meaning here, it's not something abstract. It's something that's created through small daily actions, through routines, maintaining relationships, and drawing on spirituality. So what we also saw when we asked people what about their sources of meaning during the war, what we found is the number one mechanism, that source of meaning that helped people find a sense of resilience was deep social webs, the sense of contributing and volunteering and relationships, a sense of I'm not alone in this, something that create them a sense of, I would say, even a buffer. Second, we saw meaning making, a sense of psychological organizing principle that helps people restore coherence when reality becomes chaotic, and a sense of purpose, a sense of active agency, and a sense of what we call in the meaning literature, a sense of significance and mattering, of being seen. So the sense of, and here I quoted Nietzsche, which Viktor Frankl also quotes in Auschwitz, and we saw the many people, the kidnapped who coming back said the same sentence again and again. If you have a why, you can bear almost anyhow. And we also describe that in our book that was out in Oxford University Press about Israel and how people can cope with this stressful environment through a long period of time, taking an active role and a sense of strong social ties. So while meaning relationships and agency can power resilience, they're also deeply influenced by the broader social context. And as I mentioned earlier, we see a collapse in the trust in state institutions. We see a loss of faith in security frameworks, the profound feeling of abandonment, and distrust of the future. And against this backdrop, we also see a strong sense of reliance, as I mentioned earlier, instead of top-down, a bottom-up sense. In this vacuum, we see that people are more relying on community. And in the crisis, the interpersonal trust functioned as a psychological bridge, especially when trust in institutions is low. So we see communities who were evacuated and remained together reported stronger coping through shared responsibility, mutual care, and meaningful routines. Even mundane actions such as laundry schedules, cooking, childcare became anchors of stability and dignity. And we also heard collective narratives, rituals, and spaces for remembrance, such as storytelling, events, songs, memorials that were spontaneously created and served as frameworks for processing grief and fostering hope. And we know that in moments of raptures, people's ability to sustain meaningful connection, routines, and small acts of hope is what carries them forward, not just for resilience, but also for flourishing. And this is just an anecdote, but we also know that Israel is number one globally in the lost wallet test, signifying the idea that the social support category of how people feel they have someone to count on in times of trouble is very high, even in times of trouble. So, in other words, it takes a village. When the state feels absent, the village becomes the antidote. And we see that the community resilience, not just personal resilience, is not only emotional support, it's the ability to mobilize existing resources creatively, maintaining cohesion and convert disruption into adaptive action. It's also where grief becomes shareable. And I want to quote here Francis Weller. He said that grief was never meant to be a private affair. It has always been communal. Those of us living in the West have been taught to accept the notion of private pain. This cultural conditioning leads us to lock away our grief. In our solitude, we forsake the very things that could give us solace and give us emotionally alive. Community, ritual, nature, compassion, beauty, and love. So, what we found in these interviews, in-depth interviews with people who were evacuated from their home in a very horrific circumstances, we found 4 themes of how this community healing and community resilience play out. The first one is the intra-community connections. We see that healing begins with restoration of relational proximity. People reweaving the social fabric the trauma tears apart. And this can look very simple: checking in, showing up, creating safe points of contact, making sure no one is left behind. In a sense, I would say it's like, I see you. I feel it. I belong somewhere. I'm held by others. The second one is shared action and purposeful contribution. And here we see that the communities were really encouraging people through doing and agency, a sense of shared action, mutual aid, organizing, protecting, rebuilding. And this also means giving people a sense of role, something to wake up in the morning from, and a sense of we are not only victims of what happened, we are active participants in what happens next. The third one was responsibility and routine as psychological infrastructure. And we see that as maybe one of the quiet engines of resilience is the return of some kind of structure. A sense of routine, it's not trivial. It provides a sense of predictability when reality feels unstable. We see that communities are trying to rebuild daily scaffolding through, again, childcare, food, schedules, rituals of meeting, even when they were displaced in different hotels, different places, had almost anything. They couldn't take anything when they fled. And these micro structures restore a sense of time and ground. They also allow the nervous system to exhale because life becomes slightly more organized and less chaotic. And the last one is values and rituals, which construct a sense of meaning, identity, moral repair. And we see that as a sense of shared narratives. We see that through ceremonies, cultural symbols, collective mourning practices, a sense of acting through values, which helped to create a sense of mastery. And I want to just give you a few examples, if I may, from people's own voices and quotes. Everywhere we gathered, people completely broken, traumatized, terrified of everything, and at the same time, constantly searching for a place to be together. It was when we started sharing stories, meaningful songs for grief, and it held so much meaning and moved people deeply. That what changed everything. From being curled up, another person, being curled up in a fatal position, I got up and simply moved into action. I can't fall apart now. Someone has to function. I have responsibility to do something for others, brought back the feeling that there is still something worth living for. Another person, I cried for days, nothing mattered anymore, nothing. It felt like it was all over, just over, and there was no reason to keep on living. But realizing that I have a responsibility for my community, that we are in this together, that was the moment I understood I still had something to do. And another one is that feeling that someone sees me, that what I do matters, that I count as a whole person. It doesn't have to be everywhere all the time, but someone sees me, someone smiles at me. I find meaning through the community when I feel someone acknowledges me, validates me, even without words, just a sense of caring. It's so good that you're here, that you joined us. I'm worth something. I'm doing something for someone, for society, for the community. So trying to wrap up and trying to conclude, what allows life evaluation to remain relatively high, even when emotional reality is so heavy, maybe one of the explanation of one of the explanatory pathway is social capital. We see that in the dense networks of family, community, mutual responsibility. We see that when the threat rises, there we see that these ties often become more activated, reinforce a sense of a we. We see also meaning making that can play a stabilizing role when life is uncertain. People hold on to purpose, contribution, and a sense of coherence. And we also see that another interesting thing that we saw, and in my colleagues, a big study that they've done, a longitudinal study, we also see an increased sense of belonging. And studies show that belongingness moderates the relationship between depression severity and suicidal ideation severity following the October 7th, based on a nationwide perspective study. And we see that when people feel they belong, the link between despair and risk weakens. We also see that belongingness, and we saw that after October 7th, people, Israelis, feel a stronger sense of belonging to the nation in face of this threat. And we know that Israelis have rituals that connect them, like the Kiddush on Friday night, friends from the neighborhood and the army, extended family, a sense of close knit connections. We see that the ethos of not leaving anyone behind. We saw that with the fighting to get back all of the hostages, alive or dead, back, fighting each week in the streets, thousands of people fighting to get everyone back, not leaving anyone behind. And we also see this in evidence from a nationally representative sample of 1,000 people showing a similar pattern. We see that what I would say predicts a sense of not just personal resilience, but also post-traumatic growth is the same shared foundation. And we know that resilience is primarily about survival and stabilization, but post-traumatic growth reflects something different. It reflects evolving positively. It reflects something that can contribute to appreciating life more, a strength sense of relationships, a different kind of priorities in life, and also a greater sense of spiritual awakening and a sense of growth. But it can also, of course, coexist with pain and suffering. And we see that both of these processes, bouncing back and moving forward, are fueled by personal and social resources of belonging, of a sense of connection, and a sense of meaning. I don't know how much time I'm left, but I will just continue just to conclude. So I would say that what we saw in all of these studies is a sense of moving from a sense of passiveness that we know that is very connected to PTSD, and a sense of helplessness, to a sense of acting proactively. And we see that connection is expressed through presence and mutual responsibility, Meaning is built through shared values and rituals, and stability that we saw earlier is rebuilt through routines and structure. And all of that is made through active coping. We see massive numbers of people volunteering overnight, doing everything they can in creating a sense of a we do culture, volunteering, helping, creating, giving. And we know that psychologically, this, I would say, sense of creating something and helping is helps restore three things that trauma threatens to steal from us, which is the first one is agency. I can still influence something. The second one is coherence. There is the next step. There is something, there is much more to my story, and a sense of belongingness. I'm a part of a we. And to conclude, I would say that Viktor Frankl reminds us that there is always an opportunity to see beyond the misery of the situation to the potential for discovering a meaning behind it, to turn an apparently meaningless suffering into a genuine human achievement. And I quote here the idea from Genesis. We know the tohu vavohu is chaos, but something beautiful is created out of the tohu vavohu. And this is also something that we need to contemplate in our broken world today. What can be created out of chaos? This is, I would say, an invitation for ethical imagination. Just like in Genesis, the chaos and the split may also give birth to a more holistic integration and vitality. So to briefly summarize, 4 points emerging from the data and from the studies and from our experience. The first one is that crisis can serve as a catalyst for transformation. Moments of rupture invite individuals and communities to reevaluate, as we saw, and reshape their collective narratives, personal and collective narratives. We see that also through communal responses, communities can both mourn and reconstruct and reconstitute themselves. The second point is that healing operates on multiple levels. I call that the small m, the small meaning, which is found in daily acts of care, mutual support, and interpersonal gestures, such as gathering, listening, cooking, deep sense that someone sees me, someone counts on me. And a capital M, the big meaning, which emerges through shared purpose, values, rituals, storytelling, symbolic acts, and social action. The third point is resilience is not static trait, but an active and ongoing process, the ability to adapt creatively to crisis and uncertainty. And the last point is the power of participation and local agency, restoring a sense of meaning and control despite the lack of trust or the rupture of trust top-down, providing protection from helplessness, anxiety, and isolation. So going back to the Israel paradox, high ranking is not a proof of happiness, as I would say a very light concept. It may reflect a capacity to endure these things together. A deep social web, along with meaning making, along with active agency. We also see that in the origin of Judaism, which treats happiness as something that should be practiced and cultivated through conscious decision, not something that comes from the outside, but a determined attitude to focus on the blessings in our lives, no matter how challenging the situations we face. Just a few final thoughts about implications of what we can take from that to our daily lives. The first one is to foster agency, to encourage prioritizing behaviors such as volunteering and routine, not just as productivity, but as psychological ignition. Because those behavior can jumpstart hope and help us move forward. The second one is to not neglecting the dreams and our intrapsychic world as symbolic space to restore coherence, and metabolize rapture. And the third one is to build a container. When people feel they're disconnected, when they feel isolated, we see that meaning collapses more easily. Community support isn't just helping, it's the bedrock that allows meaning making to happen. So, with an eye to the future, this is where what I call radical hope comes in. And the anthropologist Jonathan Lear writes, what makes this hope radical is that it is directed toward a future goodness that transcends the current ability to understand what it is. Radical hope anticipates a good for which those who have the hope as yet lack the appropriate concepts with which to understand it. In other words, such hope is not a naive optimism tied to a specific outcome. It is rooted in the active choice of how we relate to our circumstances, our willingness to pause and dwell in the in-between, our capacity to tolerate ambiguity and fragility, our openness to co-create new narratives, new forms of belonging, and new ethics. And I also found this Gallup global data especially intriguing and fascinating because when asked globally what people need from their leaders, people say that the number one thing that they need from the leaders, beyond stability, beyond trust, is hope. So I would end with these beautiful words by Rilke. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Trauma and crisis shatter our fundamental assumptions about safety, meaning, identity, but they can also serve, as we saw, as catalyst for positive psychological change, post-traumatic growth. They can also enable us to hold both personal and social resilience. And as we've seen, a core capacity here is the ability to embrace complexity, to hold on to multiple truths at once, to contain seemingly contradictory emotions and paradox. And I would say this is the willingness to look directly at pain as part of what makes us human, while still striving not only for survival, but also for flourishing. And perhaps instead of calling that happiness or even well-being, we might name it using a different concept that I'm currently exploring, which is wholeness, because we can be broken, but still feel whole. And Viktor Frankl calls that tragic optimism. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Next thing we'll do, if people will populate the Q&A or the chat sections, we can I'll read the questions and then our three speakers can respond. I don't see any right now. In the meantime, actually, I'll have a comment. I thought that the findings or the discussion on belonging was really profound. In my field, which is epidemiology, one of the longest standing factors that we know of that mediates or moderates the effects of bad things happening to people on long-term changes in physical health or mental health is this concept we all know, social support, tangible or emotional social support. And really the entire field of what's known as social or psychosocial epidemiology, dating back to the 1960s, its foundational finding is that people with more meaningful supports, more of a sense of belonging, even in the face of terrible things that happen to people, not necessarily October 7th, but other awful stuff, even if it causes depression or anxiety, that will not necessarily lead to anything terrible or lasting if there are supportive resources, tangible or emotional or physical or spiritual or what have you. And so that was really, I just found that really, really interesting and really meaningful. And I think that finding applies to so much, not just in the circumstance of what happened to our people on October 7th. It's really, it's very consistent with almost 60 years of research on just about everything.
Thank you so much for that valuable comment.
Dan, can you see the Dan?
Yeah, Jeff, take a look at the hands, the raised hands, and allow
Raise
Professor
hands.
Haybron.
Okay, so
Can you see?
Okay, Dan, go ahead.
Thanks very much, all of you. Really interesting talks. I was especially Dr. Russo-Netzer, in your discussion of Israel, just really fascinating, nuanced discussion. And my main one thing that came out of that for me is thinking about climate change and how do we adapt to it, turning to local community and learning more to rely on each other. That's a really, I think, a helpful model. Um, my question is really about the measures used. I wanted to ask if, and you noted some of the issues with this, like the life evaluation item used in the Gallup World Poll that they then plug into the World Happiness Report. Um, and I, and that type of measure is very useful, but it has definite problems, as I think you know, where like for instance, when you get into a coping situation or something that might trigger what's been called the psychological immune system or something where you reinterpret things. So even though it's supposed to be measuring how well you see your life going for you, um, by just redirecting your attention or focusing on this or that different thing, you can elevate your sense of how your life is going or bring it down. And I think there is kind of a systematic evaluative compression effect where when things are really bad, we kind of bring ourselves up in our judgments. And that's beneficial, but maybe not as beneficial as moving you straightforwardly up the World Happiness Report ranking is, or what it should do. So like after COVID, um, in the first report after that, at the release meeting, they showed the data that basically life evaluation globally flatlined. COVID had no measurable impact. Since then, I haven't followed the data, but we all kind of, well, what came out of that is a bunch of us wrote a book with the unfortunate title Against Happiness. I lost that title battle. But phenomena like that where it's like, oh, come on, really? If this is working, then people's lives are going just as well as they were before. If life evaluation is really tracking how well people's lives are going, and the same thing in Israel, kind of an expected return to more or less baseline for some amount of time after October 7th. I generally don't know the answer, but I suspect life is probably worse for Israelis now than it was before October 7th, and that's not being reflected there. Just one more example, like in the United States, this is very worrisome about using that is like African Americans culturally just tend to, and it's part of a broader resilience mechanism, report very high, um, uh, uh, just generally skew more positive than almost certainly that probably misrepresents relative levels compared to white Americans. So I mentioned yesterday that, by the Gallup data, the poorest African Americans in St. Louis are the least stressed group, which is just not, oh, they don't believe it. Um, so, so my one question is, but that leads to the question of, the real question is the focus on the affect measures. And in the Gallup data, it is problematic because they're just focusing more on particular feelings. And what I'm curious about is you did mention mental health data about like anxiety, depression, and so forth. And then this fascinating stuff about dreams, because basically in our research, um, mental measures of depression and anxiety are just the bottom half of a good happiness measure. And happiness understood that way is not a fleeting thing any more than depression is fleeting. Um, it tends to reflect generally how your life is going in very important ways, among other things. So what I'm curious about is there enough data on that front to form kind of a general overall picture of at least emotional well-being in the sense measured by the like depression and anxiety scales? And the second part of that question is, do you think that the dream kind of data could be, because a lot of this stuff is unconscious. We're not very good. Actually, this question came up yesterday. We're not very good at noting what's going on, and deep down in the boiler room. Dreams can kind of bring that out, but I don't know if they're systematic enough in a way that allow them to serve as kind of proxies for emotional well-being. Sorry, that was a lot.
Wow. First of all, thank you for these reflections. And I think I'm struggling with the same questions, trying to make sense of everything we see all at once, because I think, again, I think Professor Keys said that yesterday, and we see this in different studies, and also, meeting people and supporting people who were traumatized, and also the general, because this is a collective trauma, not just people who were directly exposed. And I think what we keep seeing is the coexistence of both the emotional toll, the negative emotions, as I mentioned, from moral injury to depression to suicide attempts, which was never high in Israel. It was very low compared to OECD countries, but of course these and PTSD. But at the same time, a sense of overall I would say not just survival, as I mentioned, not just going back to the baseline, but also a sense of creating something new out of the chaos. And this is why I think, as you mentioned, dreams are important to not neglect and not to, just look away from them, but trying to bring that up front, even in our clinical attempts, in a way that we can voice the chaos that we're feeling. But because many times, I would say for long period of time, I would say even for myself, I'm a person of words and I couldn't find any words. Everything is shattered and you can't even find language to describe what you're feeling. And this is an important part of mental health, being able to express what you're feeling. And what we found from people, again, non-clinical sample, people from everyday life, are speaking about the same four core issues of confronting mortality, of dealing with issues of not being able to help, but at the sense of being what they can take out of that as a sense of agency and responsibility, the sense of being alone and isolated, and at the same time wanting to and we see that also in their active sense of coping and action. So I'm not sure if this is the full response that you were seeking, but I would say that I think when we see both, when we can hold both, this is why I use the metaphor of iceberg, because if we can hold both what we see on the surface, but at the same time can hold what people are experiencing, even when they can voice that, but having a sense of someone that can hold that, a container of holding that in our communities, in our families. This is something that maybe can buffer the sense of that these kind of big measures are not nuanced enough, are not sensitive enough to capture in a way. So I'm not sure if I answered that, but again,
thank you. Thanks very much. That's very helpful.
I'd like to give Dr. Keys a chance. His hand's been up. If Corey Keys would like to weigh in.
Oh yeah, of course.
Hey, hello everyone. This is a question for Adam and Catherine. I also had some questions for Dr. Russo, but I'll hold off in the interest of time. I was very fascinated with your work on fasting, and it got me thinking about all the reading I've been doing about asceticism throughout history and in various religious traditions and cultures, and why asceticism is so deeply connected throughout religious traditions to mysticism, and where mysticism is about the direct contact with the divine. And I was curious if you thought about and did some more research on asceticism. And a secondary part of that question is if you found any research that connects fasting to silencing the brain's reward system, because I think the ego is awakened by reward. And when we engage in any kinds of activities of self-denial, we are silencing the ego by denying the reward system. Those are I'm curious your thoughts about asceticism, mysticism, and whether these practices of fasting, and I would think of asceticism as fasting plus a lot more. It's really doing people a lot of good because it silences the ego by denying the reward system in the brain. Thank you for your talk, by the way.
Yeah, maybe I can comment briefly on the second part, and then Kathy, you know so much more about comparative religion. Maybe you can comment on the first part, but the second part, first of all, Professor Keys, thank you for that question. I've long been, I think I may have been at the positive psychology summit that was discussed yesterday as a grad student or postdoc. I've long been an admirer of you and your work. Um, the silencing of the ego and the dopaminergic system, reward system, it's a really interesting question. I think it's the case, maybe Rabbi Dorf or someone else can jump in. Within Judaism, there's any number of ways you can think about why we're commanded to fast. And some of them, I think, kind of focus on the terrible feelings you have and the wretchedness that you feel and the humility that you feel as you fast and forego other luxurious behaviors on Yom Kippur and maybe other fast days. Others of them are sort of quite the opposite, that you're supposed to kind of transcend those bodily feelings. I've heard some people in a kind of mystical way, which I think transitions into your first question. Um, you're kind of rehearsing being dead a little bit. You're foregoing the needs of your body, and so you can focus on more spiritual things. So I think those interpretations are there. I don't know of any psychological work that tries to distinguish those different viewpoints or perspectives on something like fasting, but I love the question. And Kathy, can you maybe get into the mysticism and the asceticism a little more than I can?
Um, it's just such a great question, actually, and I don't think there is enough research on this, possibly because it's very hard to find just the right samples of people who want to engage in mysticism, for example. And when they do, how do you I think psychologists are maybe a little reluctant to go into any kind of truth claims or what have you. And so putting people in mystical experiences might be something we're kind of adverse to. Ralph Hood does a lot of research on mysticism. He's worked with some of the different groups, for example, like the snake handlers up in, is it Vermont?
Appalachia, I think,
Yeah,
right?
Appalachia.
Appalachia. Hmm.
But I think that's a really good question, and I don't think there is enough research on that sort of thing. And of course, then too, um, Buddhism would asceticism would remind me more of Buddhist kind of traditions. And I think in the US or in the West anyway, where psychologists again are doing a lot of research, um, it's more romanticized rather than
Hmm.
focusing on the asceticism. So I think that kind of research would probably be more effective coming out of um, Asian universities or Asian scholars. I don't know if that is very helpful or not, but
Can we let Rabbi Dorf jump in? I see his hand.
Well, we've reached the end of our time, so I want to defer to Lisa and Hava. Can we take
Okay.
Rabbi Dorf's question, or do we need to cut it short? Or
Yeah, absolutely, we can. Yes, yes,
yeah, we
yes,
are
we
going to cut
can.
off Rabbi Dorf. So,
Just
go
just
ahead.
one just one point. In Judaism, yes, Yom Kippur is not about me. It's about how we have fasted. We have sinned, right? And then there are a number of other fasts during the liturgical year that are completely communal. Tisha B'Av, right? Also a 25, 26 hour fast. And it's during the summer, so it's closer to 27 hours, right? And that's completely communal. And then the minor fasts are also completely communal. They're not about me, right? And they're not even about, they're and it's spiritual in a very communal sense, in a very historical sense, actually. So it's not like, it doesn't lead to, at least as I understand it, it doesn't lead to mysticism at all, because it's really a communal feeling. It's not an individual feeling. Done.
I will say I really appreciated Paninit's talk, because I feel like now I understand our data from Israel. I understand why the negative emotions were very high compared to the US, but also the positive emotions. I understand now why the fasting is higher, because it was a thing that you could do. It was a way to reclaim agency. I mean, your talk was heartbreaking and wonderful. Thank you.
So much, yours too. Enjoyed it.
Well, I guess that's it. Again, I'll turn it back over to Hava if you need
Okay,
to
so
close things up.
Yeah, this was absolutely fascinating. And Pninit, I'm so glad that I invited you. It's too bad we didn't meet in Israel, but it was beautiful presentation. Thank you so much.